Up next, we're joined by two people who bring decades of experience helping communities manage flood risk and build stronger waterways. Mary Powell and David, how do I say your last name? Scoutus? Good enough. All right. I'm saying it wrong. Sorry, David. We get a chance before this. But from the Mile High Flood District. Their district has spent decades helping communities reduce flood risk, improve waterways, and plan for smarter growth along rivers and creeks. Please welcome Mary and David for us. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to give this podium a shot. We'll see how it goes. Fingers crossed. All right. Well, it's been really fun to join you down here from coming down here from Denver. Anytime I come down to Colorado Springs, I am reminded that it's not that far of a drive because I live in Littleton, and it's really cool down here. And why don't I come more often? But it's been really fun. Where's the clicker? All right, to join you all today, and it's just some interesting things I heard throughout the day. A lot of talk about what we do upstream impacts downstream. Allie had a great quote that I'm totally going to steal, which is landscape abandonment. I love that one. And then I never thought that when I put my toes in a creek that water was underground for 5.5 years. So that really stuck with me. And then Nick, I don't care what anybody else says. I love the puns. Love the puns. And so as the downstream most presentation of the day, we're going to try to finish it strong. Okay. All right. I get one. I think I get one. All right. You hadn't done one in a little while, so I think the timing was there, so I took it. All right. So one of my favorite quotes is from Bill Gates, and he said that people overestimate what you can accomplish in a year, but then they underestimate what you can accomplish in 10 years. And so the Mile High Flood District, we've existed for over 50 years. We're officially well into the throes of middle age. You know, I understand Fountain Creek's kind of a rowdy teenager. And so we're here to share a little bit about who we are, how we operate, and what we've accomplished to give you some ideas from us that, you know, some you may want to use, some you may not, just to help you figure out what you want the next 10 or even 50 years to look like for Fountain Creek. Now, I'm going to assume that not everybody knows much about who we are. I'm not going to dwell on our history a ton, but let's go back to the beginning. So we were created, I've heard mention of the 1965 flood. We were created in 1969 in the aftermath of the 1965 South Platte River flood. Probably the same rain event that hit you guys down here. This was 14 inches of rain, took 21 lives, caused around $4 billion with a B dollars in damages in 2025 dollars. Remember that number, $4 billion. I'm going to come back to that at the end. And that was just for one flood, but this flood made it painfully clear that a fragmented every community for themselves approach to managing the metro area's streams and rivers was not a recipe for success. So in 1969, the legislation was created to form our district. Now, as the story goes, the legislation had passed the House, but had stalled in the Senate. And memories of the 1965 flood were already starting to wane. But then it started to rain. And it rained enough to cause another flood. This time on South Boulder Creek along Foothills Parkway in Boulder. And as legend has it, Representative Ted Bryant told the House if they wanted it to stop raining, they needed to pass the legislation, which thankfully they did. All right. I'm told that's a true story. We're a special district. We encompass 1,600 square miles around the greater Metro Denver area. And we work to protect people, property, and the environment from the devastating impacts of floods and the chronic impacts of urbanization. So we facilitate the rhyme and reason to how the waterways are managed as they cross 40 city and county boundaries. We manage 41 miles of the South Platte River, but then there are over 3,000 miles of smaller waterways, but with our regional waterways. So creeks, gulches, draws, anything big enough to have a name. Those are where we take interest. We don't spend time on little storm drains or driveway culverts or that sort of thing. But if it's a waterway with a name, then we're probably there. A little geography. I know you guys know this for the most part, but the mountains limit our westward expansion, but we have lots of room to continue urbanizing to the east if we can find enough drinking water. Aurora and Thornton are really looking for it, I promise. We have some older parts of town too, areas that were built before we started planning around flood risk, which really didn't happen until around the 1970s. So neighborhoods older than the 1970s usually weren't planned around flood risk very well. So it's this interesting mixture of older at-risk neighborhoods, total greenfield development, and then everything in between. We have 24 board members, including 22 elected officials like mayors, county commissioners, county commissioners and city council members, and then 2 registered professional engineers. Actually, I'm not the executive director, so I don't have to liaise with them that much, but no one of them has that much power. So it could cut both ways. There's 22, each one of their impacts is pretty filtered. So that's who we are and where we are. So let me describe what we do, our services. Now, for starters, I want to point out that we are involved in the full life cycle of land use and infrastructure decisions and consequences. So if any of our projects or decisions age poorly, or the decisions of others, we get the privilege of fixing them. So as you look at this series of images, they depict land use and infrastructure decisions that didn't age particularly well. Now, we didn't cause these necessarily, but we do get to deal with them. And if we built projects 30 or 40 years ago and they fell apart, we get the privilege of fixing them. So it does happen. All right, so I'm going to go through just a high-level version of what we do, our services. So one is floodplain management. We identify and communicate flood risk. We have what's called a cooperating technical partnership with FEMA that gives us local control of changes to floodplain maps. Sadly, FEMA has not paid their bill for the grant for this year, so we're funding that ourselves. Yay. But we identify the risk, but then we need to know what we can do about it. So we also do master planning. We study streams and watersheds to identify system-wide goals and potential improvements so that as we build projects, we know how it all works together. Land development still builds more new waterway infrastructure than we do, so we play a big role in working with local government partners to preserve stream corridors and ensure that private dollars that are building, that they're building quality infrastructure that taxpayers will inherit. We do not want to inherit crappy infrastructure. One strategy we use is to have the developers give us the dollars and then we design and build the waterway infrastructure. So if there's a new neighborhood getting built and there's a creek that needs to be improved, pretty sizable neighborhood, we might build that on their behalf with their money. We call it a DIP, or a developer improvement project, instead of a CIP. Get it? All right. All right. And then capital improvements, the CIP. This is where we fund, design, and build public infrastructure projects. Every project we build is in partnership with one of our local government partners. We let them generally set the priorities, but we require our local government partners fund at least 50% of the cost. So this project is in Littleton near the Breckenridge Brewery. That's a recent construction photo. Arapahoe County, Littleton, they're providing at least half the money for the project. It's very much a team sport. But because we do so much of this work, we generally are the entity that contracts for the work. So we've become kind of an expert in delivering waterway design and construction projects. Stream management, this is where we maintain and manage functionality of our systems on a yearly basis. We fund this work at 100%. Local governments very much appreciate that we will come in and do this with our own money. And that promise to maintain infrastructure has given us a lot of influence over the preservation of waterway corridors and the type of infrastructure that gets built by land development, because local governments want us to maintain the infrastructure in perpetuity, so they let us have a little bit of say about how that development interacts with the creek. We also do some property acquisition of flood-prone properties in really high-risk areas, and this is only from willing sellers, but we probably do around 3 or 4 of these a year. We also have our own flood warning system, so that includes daily forecasting and a network of rain and stream gauges that equips emergency managers with real-time information when it's actually raining. So the green pipe on the right there has one of those tipping buckets on the inside, and then there's a creek kind of off to the left that has a pressure transducer for a flow depth gauge, and then it's all connected to a cellular network. And then we also do research and development. This is where we create engineering criteria, tools, techniques, and standards for the industry this little bit of research, we were looking at testing to design safety grates to prevent someone from getting trapped against them. In this one, we worked with Larimer County Fire and Rescue. There's a flume up at CSU where this was tested. So the personnel would get in the water and tell us how they feel under different conditions. Like, how do you tell me how you feel? I mean, it's, do you feel trapped? Can you get out? It's a little bit qualitative. And then education and outreach. This is our goal is to elevate our fellow industry professionals and inform public and policy makers. This slide shows you our current staff breakdown as of this week by technical discipline. So people tend to wear different service hats at times. So this is more of a technical discipline breakdown. It's pretty heavy on the engineering side. At least half the staff are engineers. And this may seem like a lot of staff, but you'll see it's pretty light, actually, when I share the budget information later. And just keep in mind, this started with one person in 1969. So we didn't just get to 54 people one day. You could think of it as being about one a year. We may have grown very organically. All right, when it comes to results, the dividends of this long-term investment, what we've been able to accomplish, one of the simplest ways I like to describe our impact is that we make the community safer, healthier, and more livable. It's really, really great combination. So let me give you a few examples. I'm going to start with safety. How have we made the community safer? We've been around for 57 years. Show me. All right. So our efforts to make the community safer got tested bigly. There's a fly that really likes this mic. Our work got tested really big during the 2013 flood. And floods, these cause full-on trauma. And at a minimum, what we're trying to do is prevent trauma like you're seeing in some of these images from happening. Because ideally, a flood is a spectator event. It's something you can actually walk up to and look at and be like, oh, cool, the creek's up, and then walk away. Ideally, when a flood happens, that's the sort of thing that you see. Now, it can be hard to study flood damage that didn't happen, how much worse a flood would have been if we hadn't done our work. But one place we actually studied this was along Westerly Creek in Aurora, where we had 16 inches of rain. So there's been significant investment in Westerly Creek over the years because of its history of flooding, like here at Montview in the 1970s. The creek has been studied several times with master plans calling for lots of flood mitigation projects and detention basins throughout the watershed. And then these detention basins were implemented over the course of decades. So here was the plan for Utah Park. It got built as a multi-use facility, and then it did its job in 2013. This one is Expo Park, and then you see its implementation. Note the spill flows on the left, which looked like this during the flood. That spill looks dramatic, but at least it's a flooded road and not a flooded home. It's also a multi-use facility, so that photo on the top is actually from several months post-flood, so it held up really well. And then here is Kelly Road Dam, the plans, the implementation, and then you'll see the utilization during the flood. Then the Jewel Wetlands was another one of the detention basins. And I'm not trying to overemphasize detention basins. This is really a story about prevention we had invested in before a flood happened and then how it actually worked. And then lastly, the monster of Westerly Creek Dam. This thing has 4,000 acre-feet of storage. So we actually studied the flood damages avoided because this infrastructure existed. So at Westerly Creek Dam, on the right, that's how much flow comes out of the dam in a 100-year flood. It's only 45 CFS. Without these detention basins I just showed you, it would have been 15,000. So we simulated what the flood extents would have been without detention. And so we didn't. So on the right is what actually was observed. On the left is what would have happened. And we didn't avoid damages altogether in this watershed. The actual damages are in green there, but we avoided around $220 million in damages, so the red minus the green. And this just studied Aurora. It didn't even look all the way downstream in Denver. So our work did its job with a benefit cost ratio of 4.5 for just this one flood and just looking in Aurora, let alone what this will help us with for future floods. Now, Westerly Creek wasn't just a positive story about detention basins, because dams like these are not always the answer, and they come with their drawbacks, of course. But Westerly Creek was also a great story about redevelopment and stream restoration. So Westerly Creek in Denver has an interesting history. This photo shows an engineered channel that actually used to sit under the runways of the old Stapleton Airport. So with space for flood flows to spread out, resilience was largely achieved with healthy vegetation and buried riprap. I like to call it infrastructure that looks like nature. So this used to be under the runway. So I'm going to show you a series of photos taken from that bridge at the bottom right. This is another photo vantage point that helps you see a little better. That pedestrian bridge in the distance is going to show up in all these photos. So here's an initial photo on a sunny day, and then here's the exact same view at the height of the 2013 flood. There's about 100-year flows here. They had 16 inches of rain in this watershed. This photo was taken the very next day. And then back to the first photo, which is actually taken 8 months post-flood. So after a 100-year flood, there was literally nothing to fix here. So I show this to emphasize the power of prevention, and then also that even with highly urbanized hydrology, we can still use nature-based designs to protect people from floods without the thing falling apart. In this photo I showed you earlier is also on Westerly Creek in the same area. It's a flood as a spectator event and not a traumatic event. This outcome didn't happen on its own. It took lots of work over the years. So we've made the community safer. We also make the community healthier in a number of different ways through ecology, recreation, shade, access to nature. But I'll share a quick water quality story. We're not an MS4, but with our research and development group, we do provide resources to our MS4 partners. But sometimes, and I've heard a lot of talk about this today, the most impact you can have on water quality is in the receiving stream rather than in the watershed. So here, this is a restoration project along Cherry Creek. And this project accomplished a number of different goals, but one I'll focus on is pollution prevention. So on the left, you're seeing the pre-project aerial. On the right is the post-project. This project was studied to quantify how much the stream restoration reduces pollution. So prior to the project, the stream was eroding like crazy and sending all sorts of sediment and pollutants downstream through the system. So that's the list of contaminants that no longer make their way downstream on a yearly basis because of the project. So it's just one of the examples of how we work to make the community healthier. We also make the community more livable. This is not an example of making it more livable, but old school approaches to waterway infrastructure focus almost solely on moving water from point A to point B as quickly as possible. The secondary focus was stability, trying to prevent erosion, okay? Which is why you see all the concrete. So we've come to realize that waterway infrastructure has the opportunity to create a lot of daily value beyond, in addition to flood conveyance and clean water. Our projects can create numerous ecological and social benefits. They can work with nature rather than trying to strictly control it. And so one of my favorite places where you can physically see this evolution in our thinking is along Little Dry Creek in Westminster. So when I purchased my own drone, this is the first place I wanted to fly it because it has such a great visual story to tell. I filmed this imagery on the same day on the same creek within about a 2-mile stretch. And these were all capital projects we helped build. And on the right, you see abundance. On the left, I'd call it scarcity. Now, the older projects were driven by conveyance and stability goals, but the other goals we considered, the possibilities we pondered, were pretty limited. Now, in fairness, the older projects were built because people were flooded. So this photo from the 80s is right after a flood that impacted the buildings in the background, but the concrete lining work in the foreground had not extended to the background yet. So projects like this did improve flood safety, but not much else. Now, it's clear with the newer project what else is possible along an urban waterway beyond conveyance and stability. Traditional infrastructure really only activates during rare flood events. It's almost like brake in case of emergency, right? And this design creates a vibrant public space that serves people year-round. Now, here we're not looking at water as a variable to be controlled, but a force to collaborate with. We're trying to be a better friend to the creek here. This is an example of that. But Mary and I actually both worked on this project, and I just got to share a really quick story. One of my proudest career moments came just a few months ago when I was chatting with a young environmental scientist who works in our industry. He told me that when he was going to college at Metro, he would park at the train station and ride the train station in to school every day. So he would start and end his day every day right here. And he said looking out the train at this project is what inspired him to become an environmental scientist. And I was like, oh man, I wanted to like hug the guy. And I was like, I don't want to make it weird, you know? And I was like, we never hear that. We never get to like hear that. I mean, those sorts of things happen. You just don't always get to hear it. And I was like, oh my God, that was amazing. That was amazing. Yeah, so we make the, this is about us trying to have the project be valuable to the community on rainy days and sunny days. So we make the community, our homes, more livable. All right, here's just a little brief slideshow of just a random smattering of other project outcomes. These are all projects we've helped design and build, and they demonstrate this magical combination of safer, healthier, more livable. So we have an agency mission that's focused on flood protection, but we take very seriously this additional responsibility we hold in making decisions around what's possible or not in these public spaces. Usually we exclusively work in public spaces. We don't work on private land. And this is this magical place where land, water, and people come together, and that's really cool. And we don't want to screw it up. And in the past, we didn't quite get it right, so we're still trying to learn. Okay, because of this sort of event, I thought it'd be helpful for you to see how our budget is structured, how much our budget is, what it gets used for, that sort of thing. So our funding comes from a mill levy on property taxes. So everybody that lives in this 1,600 square miles as a part of their property tax bills helps fund our district. Here's an actual example property tax bill for a $585,000 home. So their yearly tax bill is a little over $3,000. And into the district, they pay about $36 or $3 a month. So it's around 1% of their property tax bill. I pridefully say that almost always we're the smallest thing on people's property tax bill. But because of the big area, it adds up to quite a bit. So here's a simplified depiction of our yearly budget that includes 4 mill levies. So we have 1/10 of a mill for general fund, 4/10 for capital construction, 4/10 for maintenance. I'll just point out that that's equal funding for maintenance as capital construction. And then we have 1/10 of a mill for the South Platte River. The river crosses in and out of like a dozen cities and counties, so having a dedicated funding source for the river has been extremely helpful. Adds up to $100 million a year. Now our capital funds I mentioned earlier, they get at least matched by our local government partners. Usually that's more like $50 million. They more than match. And then the private developer funds, in recent years, it's been around $25 million a year. So that adds up to around $175 million a year of impact, and that's with zero debt. So it's been an institutional sort of source of pride that we have zero debt as well. And I show the years by each of the mill levies, and it's to show that we didn't start with 1 mill right out of the gate. With our general fund, we did some initial master planning that identified a clear need and strategy for projects. Then we sought funding to build them in 1973. After a while, it became obvious that they needed to be maintained just like a house. It's not set it and forget it. So that came in 1979, and then by 1987, we looked for funding for the South Platte River. Now, the numbers I highlight in red for capital construction and maintenance, that's about 80 of our 100 million. By policy, those red dollars get spent back in each of our 7 counties based on each county's percentage of our revenue. So if Adams County contributes 15% of our funding, they get 15% of that 80 million. The 15% gets distributed amongst projects for the 9 communities in Adams County, but we don't guarantee a specific amount to each community. So the funding gets spent locally at a county scale, but not at a community scale. We still want to be regional and not just an extension of the smaller agencies. That policy has generally prevented competition around who gets what money. It doesn't really come up at our board meetings with 24 people. We don't hear them fighting over the money part because it goes back to the county. It probably helps that Denver's a city and a county, so they get all of it. And Broomfield's also a city and a county, and they get all of it, but it's smaller amount, much, much smaller. Okay, all right. I mentioned we have a staff of 54. Between their salaries and benefits, and then our overall operating cost to have a building and computers and pay for me and Mary to drive down here and such, that totals only $16 million per year, total overhead. So that's a 16% overhead on our money, 9% when you add in the 9% of 175 million. So it's really low overhead. Our staff primarily serve in mission and management roles. We have in-house expertise in all the services we provide because we directly manage most of our projects. But we don't do in-house production. We hire people like Drew or like Josh. We don't do the technical work. We have a staff with a background in engineering design, but we don't design in-house. We hire design consultants. We have people like Mary who are environmental permitting and ecology experts, but we hire out the detailed work. We don't have in-house maintenance crews. We don't have in-house construction crews. So most of our funding gets invested in the local economy to private companies who help us accomplish our mission. It's consulting firms, construction companies, landscape maintenance companies, forestry. And this has created this really great symbiosis with locally owned businesses. And this is such a source of pride that I actually wrote a blog article about this. You can find it on our website. And what I did here was I interviewed some of the smaller business owners we work with and worked with over the years, and just tell me your company origin story. What is the district's work that we have that we need you to help us with? What has that meant for your business thriving and growing? And for some of them, we were their first dollar in the door. And that's just been a really great sort of balance between what we staff in-house and what we hire out. And part of that power is we have a very consistent need for similar types of work. So it's just really created these great long-term relationships over the course of decades, and that's led to more innovation, more efficiency, and better use of taxpayer dollars. It's been a really great model. And in fact, this has been so meaningful to me personally and professionally that I wrote a book about it. And sorry if this is like shamelessly self-promoting, but you're the type of audience I wrote the book for. So if you're interested, cool. And if not, it's totally fine. Yeah. So in this my book's written about, why it matters, why it's in your best interest to be seen as a desirable customer by the really great designers and builders, because they don't have to bid on your projects. They don't have to work with you if they don't want to. They still have, it's still a free country. So anyway, that's a lot of our history, how we're structured, how we operate, how we're funded. Mary's going to talk about what we're still learning and improving, because we are not a finished product. All right, here you go.
Don't touch it. There. Got it. I think so. I'm going to give you those papers because they're going to fall off if they stay up here. Well, first, thanks all for staying for the last end of the day. I didn't honestly know much about the district before working with Allie on preparing our presentation and getting ready to meet you all. And I've just been really pleased with all the presentations that we've seen today, and I really appreciated all the interest you guys have had. It's exciting to be aware of an organization that has so much ahead of it. I know you have a lot behind you as well, but you really do have so much in front of you. And I know it can be a daunting task, especially for some of you who have been at the table since the start. And I hope our experience that we're sharing here gives you a little bit of perspective. I kind of was thinking, if you can think about this as an Instagram story. I'm a parent, and when I'm flipping through Instagram and I see some of those parent memes, and I'm like, oh my God, that's me. She is living my life. That's my son. I always am like, okay, I'm not alone. Other people have the same shared experience. And so I hope what you hear from Dave and me will give you a little bit of encouragement. It's possible, it's good work, and you should keep after it. So with that, Dave talked a lot about what our funding is. Based on our master plans and everything we know about projects that we have identified, what we need to fix is about $3.1 billion worth of projects that we've identified. What we have available annually is about that 50 million. So obviously, we really need to think wisely about how we're spending our money. And that leads us to the strategic question that we ask ourselves often, and that we've been continually working on, sharpening the saw constantly, is how do we know we're doing the right projects? What is a right project? So some of the impetus for change, Dave showed you some of those older style projects that I'll say a traditional engineering perspective, a lot of hard solutions, because that's what we were taught to do back in the day, is lock it in place, right? But what we recognized was we were just doing a couple of things. We were reducing flood risk and mitigating the flood risk, but we were very reactionary. We waited or something happened and we would go in and fix it. We didn't have a lot of chance to be proactive. And we were doing things in a one-off kind of ad hoc fashion. There wasn't a lot of coherency to our work plan. And we, as Dave mentioned earlier, our projects tend to be focused on hydrology and hydrologic solutions, water, point A to point B. All right, so we decide we're gonna do the right projects. To do that, we need to understand our system, and we've been hearing about that, I think, today. We all recognize streams, watersheds, they're systems. They're not parts and pieces, they all work together, right? So these assessments, and you guys have such a great resource here. We don't have that in Denver. We try to figure it out with what we can do, but it's just great you guys have such a great resource with the USGS here. Then we need to plan coherent approaches to what we're doing, recognizing if we solve one problem upstream, maybe we stop the sediment flow. What does that mean downstream? Suddenly we have hungry water and it can start to erode. So we have to be thoughtful about what we're doing and what the consequences are. And then we need to manage it. We've heard a lot about, especially Lucy had some questions about long-term management of our projects and the issues with funding, maintenance, and management. It is a problem. You can't set it and forget it. So we started talking about a systems approach, again, recognizing it's a system, and we wanted to really embrace the complexity that we were faced with and the fact that we needed to spend our money on those more multi-beneficial projects. What's happening in the context of our projects that we can help leverage with our money? Recreation trails, for us, equals maintenance access. So we're happy to have maintenance access that just happen, because we're not supposed to spend our money on recreation facilities. But if our maintenance access just happens to coincide with a recreation trail plan, great, we're happy to help you with that. We also, again, need to proactively manage and plan and manage. Dave mentioned what was the return? $1 spent on the detention was 4.5 saved in one event. So you can see the multiplier effect. And then finally, we decided, we need to be starting to think more about higher functioning, lower maintenance projects. So again, we're getting the multi-benefits, and we're trying to create systems that we don't have to spend so much money on to maintain, because maintenance money is precious and it has to spread a long way. So what we started to do, again, the higher functioning, lower maintenance, we went beyond hydrology and hydraulics in our thinking, and we added geomorphology, vegetation, and community values. Even though we're a very engineering firm, we recognize that this is all part of the system and we have to incorporate it. By the way, I think that's Dave's daughter on the end. She's much older than that now. Feisty teenager. All right, so here's an example of a couple of our projects. And I just challenge you, which of these is the higher functioning, lower maintenance project? I know what you're thinking, most of you, and it's okay. But I would say it depends on the context that you're in. That system on the left, it's in a highly urbanized area, obviously. What used to be there was just a concrete line channel. So what we were able to accomplish here is the highest functioning, lowest maintenance system we could put there in that context. The other system on the right is obviously in a broader open space area. So we had a different idea of what higher functioning, lower maintenance meant in that system. So your context is always going to be with you. None of these solutions work everywhere. All right, now here's a story you all know. This is the Instagram part where you're like, oh, yeah, that happened to us. So urbanization, what happens? And Amy mentioned this earlier. We don't adapt to our stream systems. We ask them, we demand, we insist, we force them to adapt to us. Now, you guys have a lot of opportunities out east, just as we do, to try to hold the space for the creek. As Amy said, help it put its elbows out, help it save its space, and allow it to do its thing. Within reason, though, because the hydrology changes, right? And here's this is just a little in real life, IRL, right there. Here's an example of Marcy Gulch down in Highlands Ranch. And I think this is going to speak to you guys because I think I heard a story about this earlier, or someone was mentioning it. The idea here, Highlands Ranch, smart idea. Let's stay out of the creek. We'll give it room, right? We'll give it room. That sounded great. And then we started developing, which is fine. We left a pretty good spot for the creek. But by 2010, it's pretty well built out. What we did not do a good job of, though, was recognizing what happens with increased flows. So can you imagine what happens to this creek over those years? Same old story, right? It's those day-to-day flows chewed that thing up. It was not prepared for the extra hydrology. So lesson learned. Give it some space, but be ready to do some proactive work ahead of the change in hydrology. Put in some small check structures. Adaptively manage. Keep an eye on it. You can't set it and forget it. So what happens? Did this already march through? So what happened to all that sediment? Well, like with you guys, ours went into the South Platte River. There's just a very obvious result of the sediment going downstream. Now, I think we harvested some of this sediment. In 2010, we did a project, and we used that sediment to fill in the creek upstream where all the erosion was. So we got to repurpose it, and we created kind of what we consider to be a higher functioning, lower maintenance stream system post-project. So it went from that to that, and it's held in place pretty well. Now, continuing with the systems approach, again, complexity, context, understanding the dynamic nature of our systems. Another thing we have been working with, and we're still learning about, is how to go from a fail-safe mentality to a safe fail mentality. I'll help you with this because it took me a while to get my head around it. So this is the sciencey part, the only sciencey part of the presentation. This is showing kind of a steady state of a particular system. Imagine it's a concrete channel or a concrete drop structure. That little gray ball in the bottom of the cup is in its happy spot. That's where it wants to be. The concrete's just sitting there. It's not getting eroded. It's not getting stressed out. It's really happy. But say there are some stressors that start to go. You have hydrology, you have a flood and it's putting stress and strain on that concrete. Well, the little ball kind of shows, that's where I go when I'm stressed. But when the stress goes away, I go back to my happy spot, right? It functions in a functional state under a lot of heavy stress, which is good when you're in a situation where you need a fail-safe solution, like a dam or a levee, somewhere near critical infrastructure. You want it to stay at a steady state, right? Because what happens with a structure like this, it's very brittle. Once it breaks, it's catastrophic, right? And what happens when you have that? You have to completely rebuild it. And we started with a lot of those structures, the concrete that Dave showed earlier. That used to be the mental model. It has to hold. And you know what? In some places it does, but in some places it doesn't. Oh, and here's a place that we thought it really needed to. This is a drop structure on our sand creek. We have a little sand creek similar to yours. They get their names for a reason, right? Well, you can't see it maybe, but there's Dave on that drop structure. That thing is just ridiculously enormous, and it's collapsing. So you can see there's cracks all through it. It'll take tens of millions of dollars to replace that thing. And to be honest, knowing the context it's in, they probably could have had a different solution if we were to do it today. So I'm guessing our solution when we move forward will be very different in the future. So that's the fail-safe. I always have to make sure I say it right. What is safe fail? Well, that's where we can use our natural systems and some of our softer approaches. We can use the buried riprap that Dave talked about, where we bury it and we revegetate on top of it. You can't even see it's there. Or we use soil-wrapped lifts or willow stakes, all the things you guys do here. Bindway weirs are a great example. What this second diagram shows is a little gray ball, the dark gray ball. That's, your system, your riparian system in its happy space. But in this case, in some instances, it can undergo some stress and transition into a new, still functional state. So maybe you have your ephemeral stream, and it transitions to a perennial one. They're both still functional, and you haven't really had to do too much, but it's been able to withstand that change with the resilience of that flexibility. It's able to morph under the new state and still continue to do what it needs to do. So some examples. This is the perfect example that Dave already showed. 100-year flood. There were maybe some little bits of erosion. I'm sure they went out and did some debris removal, but there was no equipment that needed to go out and fix the banks or fix any concrete, that kind of thing. We also have to understand the dynamic nature of the areas we're working in. I mentioned that before. Okay, sorry, this is the second sciencey part. But for me, it's easier science because it's more ecological. That other stuff was like physics and engineering. But this is the successional model that we probably all of us saw in high school maybe, where you have vegetation communities. You start with bare dirt. Over hundreds of years, it slowly evolves, and you end up eventually with like this mature forest, right? Well, that's how it works sort of in nature. This is very stylized. But in reality, if we're at that far end on the, what do they say, the climax community, what we've found in our experience, those tend to be very overgrown, unhealthy forests in our, excuse me, in our riparian areas, because riparian habitats are used to what? A lot of disturbance, floods, fires, herbivory. And what have we done as land managers? Well, we don't want fire for good reason. We don't want floods for good reason. And except for down south for you guys, there probably aren't a lot of cattle still running around. So we have to become the agent of disturbance. Now this figure shows kind of the same succession along the middle there, but the little circles, little spirals, those are kind of disturbance events, any one of which could reset the system to various places. So we need to understand as an organization, where do we want our systems to be along this successional line here, and how do we manage them to keep them where they function to best use? So here's an example of a little drainage way, excuse me, in Golden. We went in to improve it. Those are not bricks, they're dirt-filled sacks with seeds, which then grow grass, which then grow more grass. It's great, this is how we want it. And then, let's see if I time this right. Yes, 5 years later, whoa, dang, that's a lot of trees and shrubs. That's really not what we want it to be looking like. So we went in and did some vegetation management. We disturbed it and reset it to its functional state. So, oh yeah, that was all just naturalized. I mean, you leave it alone and it will go crazy. Now, some of it may have been from old adventitious roots that were still left, but most of it's just self-planting, I guess. So, earlier I said higher functioning, lower maintenance, and you might be thinking, well, geez, every 5 years going in to maintain this thing, that seems like a lot of maintenance. Well, you're right. There's not vegetation to maintain here every 5 years, but you know what you have to do every maybe 30 years, which isn't that long. Whoops, I got off my cadence here. The concrete here, you not only have the high structural cost to build it, you're right, down low, there's not a ton happening with monitoring and maintenance, but when it breaks, remember, it's brittle, and it breaks big time. So the maintenance isn't just a little bit here and there every 5 years, it's a big chunk of change, and it may be more costly to replace it than you built it because of inflation, right? You get this. Rather, and these guys, that's dedication to go down and finish the concrete on a plank like that. But anyway, let's see. There it goes. There's the cost. Unlike the natural systems, and again, we're talking about trying to maximize our money and at the same time making great places for people. These are, in my mind, more livable places. So yes, we have the initial investment. Oftentimes it's less than the hard structures, the engineered solutions, but we do have the little pulses of maintenance, but we never have that, hopefully we don't have that huge maintenance need at the end. So here maintenance is a string trimmer, some loppers, maybe a little bobcat if you have to reset some bank here and there. And again, this is just an example. These are numbers that Dave had done, Dave Skudis, by the way, had done for some maintenance comparison, and there is no comparison. It's just crazy. So anyway, hopefully some of these are lessons that we've learned that you can apply in your own setting. But again, we're thrilled to have the chance to share our experience with you, and Dave's going to wrap it up just a little bit and bring home the message.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so I mentioned the 1965 flood. That was one flood, caused $4 billion in damages. Since 1965, between our own funding, partner funding, all shown in 2025 dollars, we've probably invested nearly $4 billion in 57 years. And that's gotten real results, a safer, healthier, more livable community. And so it's pretty amazing what you can accomplish over the course of decades, but at some point you have to begin and you have to commit. And so I hope we've given you some things to consider as you ponder what the next 50 years look like for Fountain Creek. So I'm happy to take some questions.
Questions right out of the gate. Perfect timing.
I'm sorry if I missed this, but how big is the Mile High District, and how does that compare with Fountain Creek Watershed?
Yeah, we're 1,600 square miles. I think I saw that you guys are 900 and some square miles, so land area bigger, but not similar in scale. And a little over 3,000 miles of what we consider regional waterways, and they're big enough that we take on a role with them. Yeah.
I hope I'm phrasing this correctly, but it looks as if you had relatively wide areas at the Little Dry Creek or the Cherry Creek area. You had room to spread out. I'm not 100% familiar with all of the Fountain Creek area, but there definitely are some very restricted arteries. People build right up to the edge of the creek. Roads come right off of the creek there. Have you had to recover or buy out a significant number of areas to make those work? Or is that all stuff that came in from development?
Yeah, it's all over the place. I'll say on the Little Dry Creek project with the Westminster Station, the big beautiful project, that was a formerly industrial area. There was like a publishing company. There was like a water treatment plant, a few other things, 40-acre site. Almost all of it in the floodplain. And over the course of, I'm not sure how long it took the city of Westminster, but over the course of time, they purchased those properties. And so then over time, any structures that were there were demolished. And then the light rail coming in, that train station getting built, was a huge catalyst to reduce flood risk, and then invest in this opportunity right adjacent to the train station. I didn't mention it, but the tracks were 4 feet underwater in the floodplain, so that was an issue, and also a catalyst for the project. But I use that word catalyst because there's usually going to be something that animates our projects. And so when Mary showed the 5 elements, that's one of those things we really consider and own is we're going to make decisions about public land here, and we don't want to just make them as engineers with just engineering goals, and we want to really use some divergent thinking to understand everything that's possible. And sometimes they take a little while.
It's green. Okay, thanks. If you don't mind, I'd like to also add, you're absolutely right. In many of our areas, and that's partly why I showed that example with the channel with the streets right next to it. We deal with that a lot, for sure, because we have those older neighborhoods that did not take floodplain planning into account. So certainly, and I tried to bring that point, it really does depend on the context, and no one solution is going to work. You're not going to be able to have those nice broad floodplains everywhere to use those nature-based systems. But even in the middle of that highly urbanized area, we took it from a concrete line channel to what you saw, and it has so many more benefits for the community. The people that live there are absolutely thrilled with it. And so we were able to turn it into a higher functioning and potentially lower maintenance system, even in the middle of the urban area. So to Dave's point, we thought beyond the H&H, and we added the community to our process, and it was incredibly valuable and paid off great dividends.
And I would add that this picture that Mary showed is kind of an example of where we try to be opportunistic too. This is on the South Platte River. South Platte River through most of Denver is highly confined as well. Occasionally we have land on the side, and then you just got to kind of grab the opportunities wherever you can to do something amazing.
Can you share the district's project partnering approach and what makes that so successful?
Dave, thank you. How much did he pay you?
Yeah, so what Jessica's referring to is, I mentioned the symbiotic relationship we have with a lot of designers and builders. And so one thing we've been very intentional about is trying to avoid this sort of low bid environment for construction, because it just creates a game out of projects and ends in litigation, challenges quality, all sorts of different things. And with so many projects we work on, we found ourselves not wanting to fight that fight on every big project. And I think the epiphany came when it was pointed out that on our smaller maintenance projects, we had a list of on-call contractors we could contract with directly, negotiate the scope and the cost, work with very efficiently. We'd been gaining these relationships, great levels of trust. And it was like, well, gosh, why are you just using whoever low bid, Jim's backhoe service on these big capital projects that are higher stakes, higher risk, more impactful? And so that was kind of the epiphany that led us to creating what we call project partners. And so in short, it's we use a pre-qualified system for contractors. And then once we have pre-qualified contractors, we have a very efficient means of then picking them for projects. We bring them in during design to have them help us with design. We're usually working in very confined, complicated, challenging areas. So it's as much about what we're building as how we go about building it from a risk standpoint, a phasing standpoint, schedule standpoint, community engagement standpoint. It's gotten to the point where some of our contractors are ambassadors for us during construction, and it's just been this really great symbiosis, and it leads to greater efficiency and greater innovation. Yeah.
So as a wise middle-aged district, what advice would you give?
I didn't say wise. Did I? I just said middle-aged.
Well, you demonstrated the wise through your presentation. What advice would you give to the teenage district down here?
Well, I'm going to just step in it. I mean, honestly, what I've been hearing again and again is show me the money. We were fortunate in Denver, darn it if it wasn't just 2 floods that did it, but we were able to get the mill levy passed. And that did it. I know every situation is different, and I will say what that meant was it took alignment. It took alignment for a number of things to happen. The framework was there. There was a champion. So the district is here. That is step one. So great. I think the next step is just the communities need to decide what kind of investment into the community is a reasonable investment to make to improve, what were your 3 words? Health, safety, and livability. Did I get it? To make a more livable system, both in the urban areas and in the downstream, more rural parts that have problems with the loss of property and whatnot.
That could be our campaign slogan.
Show me the money. Yeah.
Safe livability.
Oh, sure. Dave will trademark.
I'll trademark it, yeah. Yeah. I think also what I was trying to cut across is like we didn't get to where we are one day. Incrementalism is huge. And, but if you kind of pick the things you want to tackle at a time, I'd also say that like thinking of things in a full cycle in perpetuity, because I think we're on sort of the 3rd generation of leadership at the district, and some of these fundamental things have aged pretty well. I would say the investment back in the county, sort of avoiding the infighting amongst the different communities who could all get a focus of our funding has been really helpful so that that's not happening all the time. I think what I mentioned about being structured as more of a management agency and finding that balance between internal versus external resources has been really helpful, but we do need in-house expertise. We don't want to just not know anything about what folks are doing. So that's been really helpful too.
So my question is about the mill levy. It looks like the most recent one you had is from the mid-1980s, but there's a lot of work still to be done. Are you pursuing any additional mill levies?
We are not pursuing any additional mill levies, but in 2018 we did debruce. So debrucing in 2018, getting out from under Tabor. By 2018, that 1 mill had been ratcheted down to, I think, about 0.5 or 0.6. So what funding we statutorily could collect had been cut down that much over time. And so debrucing was hugely beneficial, and it's allowed us to be even more impactful. So, and since that was only like 8 years ago, we still have the scars from the political process. It went fine in retrospect, but it's not something we're really anxious to tackle again. But it was totally worth it, so.
Question on the floodplain. Have you been able, through some of your work, to be able to say, okay, this area is no longer a floodplain that's buildable, which then lowers the homeowner's cost of having to get floodplain or flood insurance through FEMA, which could help then justify, $1 or 1% or whatever it is for those people that, okay, we don't have to pay flood insurance anymore.
Yeah, that's, yes, for sure. So much of our work is flood mitigation work. And so certainly whenever we do that, the point of that usually is to protect property or structures or arterial road or whatever it is. And then we'll change the floodplain map after the project, after which then they no longer need to purchase flood insurance. And so one big example, construction, I'm not sure if it started, but it's going to start really soon. As you go into Boulder along Highway 36 from Denver towards Boulder, on the south side of Highway 36, we're going to build a flood control dam with Boulder on South Boulder Creek. That flood I showed earlier, well, South Boulder Creek flooded again in 2013. And there is a solution. And so it's basically a flood control dam that really just activates in big 100-year flows. But that's going to take the flood risk off of hundreds of homes that will then post-project hopefully not have to pay flood insurance. Yeah.
Just kind of a little wonky question on some of your restorations. I see those concrete line channels and the water's just running off. It's not touching the ground. Back in the day, the creeks used to flow over dirt. They'd sink down and recharge the groundwater. Do you have specific tactics to get that water back into the ground in some of these projects?
I'll take that. I wouldn't say we have specific tactics to do that. I will say that in a lot of our projects, that happens just because of the nature of the project. For those projects where we're able to, like an incised sandy system, where we're able to reconnect the channel to its floodplain, to those overbank areas, it absolutely spreads out and soaks in much better. I will also say in some sandy situations, we do have to put in some sort of cutoff structure, like either a sheet pile or a concrete cutoff. And in those places, the water actually comes up oftentimes and re-wets that overbank, and we get a establishment of healthy stands of willows and whatnot. So it's a little bit of some of it's percolating back in and some of it's coming up. But we don't deliberately do it, and partly just we don't want to get into the water balance and water rights pieces that might go along with that. But it's been very successful at raising the water table post-project to re-wet the floodplain.
Yeah, one thing I want to add that I don't know that we emphasize terribly, but we're in an urban setting, and I saw a slide about Fountain Creek that like 50% of the typical surface water is from somewhere else. We're in an environment where we have an urbanized hydrology. We have a highly human-impacted hydrology that we are dealing with that at a watershed scale, we are not going to undo that. At the same time, we can design our projects to mimic nature in lots of different ways, but it's not natural for that creek. The only thing that would be natural for that creek is if humans didn't exist there, okay? So we're sort of trying to find that balance to be better friends with nature. And so one of the most common techniques we use is void fill riprap. It basically tries to mimic a mountain stream bed, that has lots of different sized rocks. It's really dense, but stuff grows in it, and those roots grow down through the rock matrix and actually make the structure stronger over time. It's been really cool to see. And that, in that Westerly Creek flood image, there's all sorts of buried riprap along that creek. You just don't see it because the vegetation's grown down through it. Also, in nature, streams move across the valley, left and right, hundreds of feet perhaps. That rock's designed to stay there even in a 100-year flood. So generally that low flow is going to probably stay right about where we put it, but it's this balance we found in the urban setting that sort of tries to make the best of both worlds.
We have 2 minutes and 18 seconds left, so if there's maybe one more question.
I see one back there.
We have it, thank you.
Thank you. So I was curious during the presentation about the fail-safe versus safe-fail engineering projects about what happens with the projects that you end up deciding have to still be designed according to that fail-safe ethos. How do you, with your new understanding of how this works, manage that frustration?
Well, I would go back to that, it's called the Uvalde tributary with the channel down the middle of the road. That is a fairly fail-safe option right there. What's happened is that the structural piece has been somewhat removed from the low flow channel. So that low flow channel still has a chance to do a little bit of wiggling. It's not a ton, admittedly. But what's been allowed is that the critical infrastructure, that doesn't get hit until it moves quite a bit. So it's, as Dave said, it's a balance. And the trick is making sure you're fully aware of what your risks are when you go in, and kind of knowing where you need to land on that scale. For sure, but it's never one or the other, right, in an urban area. But yeah, no, that's a good question. And, hey, if it's going to be fail-safe, by God, we're going to make it the best fail-safe system we can. So that's the reality.
And there's still a time and a place for that sort of solution. There in the Globeville neighborhood in Denver, it's sort of north of downtown, West Bank neighborhood. There's a levee that is not tall enough or long enough to protect them. So we have a project with Jessica's company to raise and lengthen that levee right now. That's not a solution we like, but given all the set of circumstances right there, it's the solution that makes sense. So we don't want to be, dogmatic about things. We are in a very dynamic contextual environment.
Yeah, I will say to my earlier point, that levee is the highest functioning, lowest maintenance solution for that particular context. It's all, and thank you CDOT, FHWA for context-sensitive design. I mean, that's what it's all about, so.
How about a round of applause for Mary Powell and Dave Skutis?